Ladies and gentlemen, Britain is back on the world stage, working with our partners, doing deals that will grow our economy and putting more money in the pockets of working people. In the last 2 weeks alone, we've delivered trade deals with India and the US. And that means jobs saved, jobs created, more growth, and a huge vote of confidence in this country. It shows that as global instability is rising, the decisions that we've taken to stabilise the economy and lead the way internationally have made Britain a place where people want to do business once again. And from that position of strength, today we have struck this landmark deal with the EU, a new partnership between an independent Britain and our allies in Europe. This is the first UK-EU summit. It marks a new era in our relationship. And this deal is a win-win. It delivers what the British public voted for last year.
Just hours ago, the UK's highest court dropped a political bombshell, exposing a secret EU deal tied directly to Keir Starmer. The Supreme Court didn't just shut down a hidden alignment strategy, it declared it unconstitutional. No vote, no debate, just quiet backroom deals meant to drag Britain back toward Brussels. Starmer's team had been working in the shadows, crafting legal blueprints to mirror EU rules, from food safety to environmental laws. They called it technical cooperation. The court called it unlawful.
The Prime Minister is going to pay the EU, Mr. Speaker. He's going to pay the EU to abide by laws that we have no say on. While British farmers struggle with the family farms tax his Chancellor has imposed on them, their regulations will now be made in Paris and enforced in Brussels. It is a total capitulation. We're not in the EU. We are not at the table. So can the Prime Minister tell us how is he going to ensure accountability for the hundreds of regulations he has signed this country up to?
Now Labour is imploding. Red Wall MPs are furious. Constituents are demanding answers. Inside Parliament, the mood has turned from tense to mutinous. For a man who promised to respect Brexit and lead with integrity, the fallout is nothing short of catastrophic. A question now gripping Westminster. If Starmer built his leadership on trust and legality, what's left when both collapse? Labour's communications team immediately scrambled into damage control, issuing statements laced with bureaucratic terms like misunderstanding and routine policy discussion. But those phrases didn't stand a chance against the language used by the Supreme Court. The justices weren't vague, they were blunt. The ruling made it clear that what Starmer's team attempted wasn't a policy disagreement, it was a constitutional breach. The court condemned the secret regulatory negotiations as a misuse of executive influence and a violation of parliamentary sovereignty. It emphasised that such sweeping legal shifts, especially those with international implications, require full and open parliamentary approval. Documents presented during the case revealed that draft regulatory alignments had already been shared with EU contacts. Some departments were actively preparing to implement changes that would bring UK standards back in line with Brussels, and all of this was being done in silence, without a single vote or public announcement. The court's decision wasn't just a legal rebuke, it was a warning. British democracy isn't a tool for backroom deals, and any leader who tries to treat it that way will be held accountable. For years, Keir Starmer carefully positioned himself as the grown-up in British politics, a former prosecutor who valued the rule of law, a steady hand meant to restore credibility after years of division. But the Supreme Court's ruling stripped that image bare. What emerged instead was a portrait of calculated deception, not the reformer he claimed to be, but a strategist who tried to smuggle through monumental changes without public consent. For millions of voters, especially those who backed Brexit, this wasn't just a political scandal, It felt like confirmation of everything they feared about the establishment. Starmer's silence in the hours after the verdict only made things worse. No press conference, no explanation, just a void where leadership should have been. And in that void, outrage grew. From the Red Wall to social media, the message was clear. Trust had been broken, and there was no quick way to fix it. Labour didn't just lose control of the story, it lost its moral high ground. And for a party that promised to restore faith in politics, that's a wound that cuts deep. The backlash inside Labour wasn't slow, it was immediate and fierce. Within hours of the ruling, backbenchers flooded party leadership with angry messages demanding explanations. Some of them had campaigned in Brexit-heavy districts, assuring voters that Starmer would respect the referendum result. Now, they were left defending a leader who had done the opposite behind closed doors. Then came the leaks. A memo from Starmer's team revealed instructions to downplay EU negotiations, with talking points designed to mislead both the press and MPs. It advised shadow cabinet members to frame the realignment plan as harmless economic cooperation, even though the legal documents showed it was anything but. The response was volcanic. MPs felt used, sent out to reassure their communities while being kept in the dark themselves. Some began calling for emergency party meetings. Others demanded that Starmer face his colleagues and explain why they were left blindsided. Then the first resignation hit. A junior shadow minister from a Leave voting region stepped down, releasing a letter that pulled no punches. She accused the leadership of betraying both the party's values and the public's trust. And her exit ignited a storm that was already building inside the party ranks. That first resignation wasn't an isolated act. It opened the floodgates. More junior ministers followed, each statement striking harder than the last. The tone shifted from disappointment to fury. Many of them had risked their reputations vouching for Starmer's integrity. Now, they felt they had been lied to, just like the public. In private, Labour's internal factions began circling. Moderates saw an opportunity to push for a leadership change, hoping to salvage the party before the next general election. Meanwhile, the party's traditional left saw the chaos as a way to reclaim control after years of centrist dominance under Starmer. The unity that Starmer had spent years building was disintegrating overnight, and the whispers inside Parliament weren't whispers anymore. They were demands. Senior MPs began floating the idea of a leadership challenge. Some even pushed for a vote of no confidence within the party. Labour headquarters, usually a hub of discipline and control, turned into a bunker. Staff stopped giving interviews, journalists were locked out, strategy meetings turned into crisis sessions. But the truth had already escaped, and it was now far beyond their control. By the next morning, the full extent of Labour's crisis was on display. Dozens of MPs, many of them long-time loyalists, were publicly distancing themselves from Starmer. Shadow ministers, who had once defended his every policy, were now calling for him to step aside. The sense of betrayal was personal, and the calls for accountability were getting louder. Even Labour's traditional allies in the press began to turn. Editorials accused Starmer of treating voters like fools and warned that his credibility might never recover. Some commentators pointed out the bitter irony. The man who built his image around legal precision and respect for democratic norms had now been condemned by the highest court in the land. Focus groups revealed a deep sense of disillusionment among working-class voters. Support in Leave-leaning areas was plummeting, and while the public's anger was building, so too was the pressure inside Westminster. By that afternoon, no confidence vote wasn't just a rumour. It was a real possibility. Starmer's silence in the face of this political firestorm only made it worse. His refusal to answer questions, to take ownership, to speak directly to the people, it all looked less like strategy and more like fear. While Labour scrambled to contain the fallout, the numbers began rolling in, and they were devastating. In just 2 days, Labour's polling advantage had collapsed. In some Brexit voting regions, support dropped below 25%. Even in traditional strongholds, voters were wavering. What had been a cautious lead toward the next election was now slipping away fast. Meanwhile, Reform UK seized the moment. Their leader capitalised on the outrage, branding Starmer as a political fraud and demanding a full criminal investigation into the EU realignment scheme. The message was simple and direct. Labour had betrayed Brexit, and only Reform still respected the will of the people. The Conservatives, despite their own internal issues, didn't waste the opportunity either. Ministers blasted Starmer as a constitutional saboteur, accusing him of trying to sneak Britain back into the EU without permission. The Prime Minister's attack in Parliament hit hard, while Labour's front bench sat in stony silence. For a party hoping to present itself as united, modern and electable, this was an unthinkable collapse. And for Starmer, it was clear he wasn't just losing support, he was losing control of the narrative entirely. Keir Starmer's leadership was built on three pillars: competence, trust and legality. But in a matter of hours, all three were in ruins. The Supreme Court's ruling didn't just reveal a policy failure, it unmasked a leadership crisis years in the making. His public persona, the calm, principled lawyer steering Britain out of political chaos, now looked like a hollow facade. Instead of facing the storm, Starmer issued a carefully worded statement, insisting the documents had been misread and that no binding agreements were in place. But voters weren't buying it. The court's verdict had been too precise, the paper trail was too long, and the fallout too widespread. Party veterans urged him to ride it out, hoping attention would shift elsewhere. But many within Labour were done waiting. MPs in marginal seats saw the damage firsthand. Emails flooding in, phones ringing off the hook with fury, activists threatening to resign. The crisis wasn't slowing, it was accelerating. And at its core was a question no press officer could spin away. If Starmer had really believed in this plan, why didn't he have the courage to tell the country? With public trust in freefall and internal rebellion growing louder, Labour's once disciplined machine began to fracture. Behind closed doors, the blame game was in full swing. Senior aides turned on one another. Communications staff accused policy teams of keeping them in the dark. Shadow cabinet members demanded an emergency meeting to reassess leadership. What had been a tight political operation was now operating on fear and confusion. Crisis meetings at Labour HQ stretched into the night. Leaked recordings from inside revealed a party leadership overwhelmed and unable to agree on a path forward. Some pushed for full transparency, others insisted on riding out the scandal. No one had a clear answer. Meanwhile, grassroots organisers, the engine behind Labour's election strategy, were beginning to revolt. Local branches demanded answers. Constituency Labour parties were sending formal letters to party headquarters. And several long-time donors began putting funding on pause. For a party that had clawed its way back to credibility after the chaos of previous years, this scandal was tearing it all apart. And for Starmer, the walls weren't just closing in, they were crumbling. As the days rolled on, Starmer found himself increasingly isolated. Former allies grew distant. Those who once praised his steady hand were now avoiding interviews or offering vague support. One by one, prominent shadow ministers began falling silent, or worse, resigning. The pressure reached a boiling point during an emergency meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party. What was meant to be a closed-door conversation turned into a full-scale confrontation. Multiple MPs stood up to demand answers, their frustration echoing what was already boiling in the streets and across the media. Some described the scene as outright mutiny. Accusations flew. Starmer was told in blunt terms that he had destroyed trust, not just with voters, but with his own team. And all the while, Starmer remained rigid. No apologies, no admissions, just the same rehearsed message, miscommunication, legal nuance, misunderstanding. But those words held no weight anymore, not when the party was bleeding support and unity at the same time. At that point, it was no longer a question of if he'd fall, but when. The political cost of Starmer's silence was already high, but the polling data confirmed just how far Labour had fallen. In the span of less than a week, public trust in Starmer as a leader had collapsed. In key swing constituencies, Labour's projected margins flipped overnight. Some red wall districts, once back in Labour's grip, now showed Reform UK, or the Tories edging ahead. Among over 50 SS, a group Starmer had made inroads with, support cratered. Focus groups showed a shift in tone, from scepticism to outright anger. The common thread was betrayal. People didn't just feel let down, they felt tricked. The Supreme Court ruling didn't just hurt Labour's momentum, It shattered the illusion of integrity Starmer had worked so hard to cultivate, and in an election cycle already filled with uncertainty, his legal humiliation gave opponents a clean, devastating narrative. The numbers told a brutal truth. The public wasn't waiting for Labour to fix itself. They were preparing to punish it at the ballot box. Labour's implosion has now become a full-blown political reckoning, with the Supreme Court's ruling exposing secret EU negotiations and resignations piling up from within. Keir Starmer stands almost entirely alone. His allies have scattered, his image lies in ruins, and the party is bleeding support across the country. Reform UK is gaining momentum by calling out the betrayal. The Tories are hammering home the message: Starmer can't be trusted, and voters, especially those in Leave-leaning regions, are making up their minds fast. Inside Labour HQ, the operation has shifted from campaigning to crisis management. Meetings are tense, messaging is chaotic, donations are slowing, and whispers of a leadership challenge have now turned into loud public demands for Starmer to step down. What began as a secret strategy to realign with Brussels has turned into a political disaster of historic proportions. Starmer promised transparency and order, but in the end, he may be remembered as the leader who underestimated the people and overplayed his hand. Do you think he can survive this? Or has Keir Starmer just triggered his own downfall? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more breaking updates.